Qing Dynasty that measured grain by the boatload, ranked every official, and guarded distant frontiers failed before steam, debt, and gunfire. The Qing ruled hundreds of millions and gave China its last imperial form. When it broke, more than a throne ended. An order that had shaped Asia began to come apart. Its power depended on rice accounts, stipends, seals, and village taxes. Then the figures stopped meeting the grain. Here, weakness was not an invasion. It was a system beginning to lie to itself. What happened when the state could still write commands, but could no longer move men, money, and metal? The first fracture was quiet. Unpaid soldiers, missing shipments, orders sealed too late. Before the throne vanished, its authority was already lying unread beside the rifles.
At the treaty ports in the last years of Qing rule, steam smoke, foreign rifles, telegraph wire, and imperial robes could appear within the same morning. The dynasty still had seals, armies, and officials, but command no longer traveled fast enough to matter. Customs ledgers, court edicts, railway loans, and drill books were now part of the same political crisis. To understand why that crisis became so severe, the story has to move backwards, away from the treaty ports, beyond the passes of the Great Wall, into the cold forests and river valleys of the northeast. The Qing began among peoples Chinese sources had long called Yurshan. By the early 17th century, a leader named Nurhaci was gathering clans, warriors, and households into a disciplined order. His achievement was practical before it was imperial. He turned kinship, tribute, capture, and alliance into a system that could count men, feed horses, reward loyalty, and punish defection. The Eight Banners began as fighting units, but they also became communities. A man served under a flag. His family was registered with it. This frontier order was not static. Under Hong Taiji, Nurhaci's successor, it became a state with wider ambitions. He promoted the name Manchu in 1635, helping turn several Jurchen groups into a more formal political identity. The next year, he proclaimed the Qing Dynasty. Mongol allies were drawn in. Surrendered Han Chinese soldiers and artillerymen were incorporated. A regime that had first grown on the edge of Ming power now spoke in the language of dynastic rule. The Ming Dynasty, meanwhile, was weakening from inside. Its court was divided. Its treasury was under strain. Frontier defense was expensive, and local order was breaking in places where drought, taxation, and insecurity sharpened resentment. In 1644, Beijing did not first fall to the Manchus. It fell to the rebel leader Li Zicheng. The Chongzhen emperor died as the old Ming order collapsed around him. At Shanhai Pass, the Ming general Wu Sangui made a choice that changed the empire's future. He allied with the Manchus against Li Zicheng's rebel forces. Qing armies entered through a gate opened by crisis, calculation, and fear. They took Beijing, but taking the capital was not the same as ruling China. Full consolidation took decades. Southern Ming loyalists resisted. Coastal strongholds endured. Local elites watched, hesitated, submitted, or fought. The new rulers had to make conquest look like legitimate government. They preserved much of the Chinese bureaucratic world because it gave them reach. County magistrates still heard lawsuits. Land registers still mattered. Scholars still studied for examinations in the Confucian classics. The calendar, legal code, ritual order, and granary system continued. Yet the dynasty above them was Manchu, and it guarded its own banners, language, genealogies, and martial memory. For ordinary people, the new order first appeared through routine. A clerk unrolled paper. A magistrate read proclamations. A village headman counted land. In the capital, Manchu nobles moved through guarded spaces, while Chinese officials entered court in robes marked by rank. In banner training grounds, men practiced archery and mounted skills that recalled the dynasty's origins. The empire was being joined together by ceremony, military discipline, and paperwork. The Kangxi emperor gave this joined order durability. Coming to power as a child, he later faced dangers that could have broken the dynasty while it was still young. The revolt of the three feudatories challenged Qing control in the south and southwest. The Zheng regime on Taiwan remained a maritime rival. On the northern frontier, relations with Russia required negotiation as well as military pressure, including the Treaty of Nachinsk. Kangxi answered these problems with campaigns, diplomacy, inspections, and careful authority. He was a ruler of horses, boats, and books. Kangxi toured the south, inspected waterworks, and watched the machinery of government beyond the palace walls. He patronized scholarship and studied with Jesuit advisors, especially in astronomy, mathematics, and cartography. European instruments did not overturn Qing political thought. They entered imperial service. Better maps helped define frontiers. Calendrical science strengthened ritual authority. Knowledge was useful when it could be placed beneath the throne. Water held the empire together as surely as banners did. The Yellow River and the Grand Canal were not background. They were working structures of power. Grain moved north in barges through locks, towpaths, and silted channels. Boatmen shouted in bad weather. Guards watched warehouses. Officials worried over embankments that could fail after heavy rain. If grain did not arrive, soldiers went unpaid. Capital supply faltered, and distant fields suddenly touched the emperor's table. By the 18th century, Qing power had become immense. The Qianlong emperor inherited a state whose institutions were confident and whose horizons were continental. His court displayed refinement on a grand scale. Painted scrolls, porcelain, carved jade, catalogues, libraries and ceremonies arranged with exacting care. At Changde, beyond Beijing, palaces, gardens and temple complexes rose among lakes, plains and wooded hills. It was a retreat from summer heat, and also a political stage. Changde showed the Qing vision more clearly than Beijing alone could. There, the emperor could receive Mongol nobles, Tibetan Buddhist figures, and inner Asian envoys in a setting designed for imperial theatre. Temple architecture echoed forms associated with Tibet and Mongolia. The message was visible in stone, timber, and roofline. The ruler was presenting himself as a Confucian sovereign in one setting, a Manchu lord or Buddhist patron in another. The empire was governed through several languages of authority. Civil officials administered counties. Banner garrisons guarded strategic cities. The Lifanuan managed many inner Asian affairs. The Board of Rites sustained Confucian ceremony. Tibetan Buddhist patronage helped bind the court to Mongol and Tibetan worlds. Such flexibility helped the dynasty rule a vast and diverse space. It also required a center that could keep many relationships within imperial balance. Qianlong's campaigns pushed that balance westward. The defeat of the Dzunga power was one of the decisive struggles of Qing expansion. It was also severely destructive. The conflict brought mass displacement, demographic rupture, and new patterns of settlement across parts of Inner Asia. Xinjiang came under Qing rule through garrisons, military colonies, local oasis leaders, and frontier administration. This was not simply a larger map. It was a new regime at the edge of empire. The Qing experimented there with military farms, resident officials, local intermediaries, and supply systems built across hard country. Turkic, speaking oasis communities, Mongol groups, and Manchu commanders now lived within a new imperial framework. A frontier garrison in Xinjiang needed grain, silver, horses, and reliable command. At the edge of the empire, grandeur could look like a mud, walled fort, a storehouse, a prayer hall, and a line of soldiers waiting for supplies. Splendor had another, quieter edge. Qianlong sponsored the Siku Quanshu, an enormous project to collect and classify written works. It was a feat of scholarship. It was also an act of control. Texts, judged dangerous, could be suppressed or destroyed. Court culture preserved, arranged, and censored at once. In the polished rooms of imperial learning, the fear of disloyal words sat close to the brush. Away from court, prosperity had its own texture. In Suzhou, craftsmen worked silk, lacquer, wood, and stone for markets shaped by wealth and taste. In Hangzhou, merchants and boatmen moved through canals and warehouses. In examination halls, candidates sat in narrow cells with ink, bedding, and years of memorized texts. In Guangzhou, foreign traders waited within the restricted factories outside the city walls, dealing through licensed Chinese merchants under official supervision. A shopkeeper weighed silver. A woman spun thread for household income. A porter slept beside cargo before dawn. Qing order lived in such transactions, not only in palaces. It depended on the belief that local life, market exchange, official hierarchy, and imperial ritual could keep fitting together. For a long time, that belief had evidence behind it. The empire was large, busy, and often remarkably resilient. Population growth made that world more crowded and less forgiving. During the long peace, numbers rose dramatically. Families reclaimed hillsides, migrated inland, and divided land among sons. New crops helped sustain settlement in some regions. More people also meant more tenancy, more debt, and more disputes over rent, water, and timber. The state took pride in relatively light regular land taxes. In hard years, that restraint left little spare revenue. The bureaucracy was far smaller than the society it governed. A county magistrate might handle taxation, trials, famine relief, education, public works, and security for a population larger than many European towns. He depended on clerks, runners, local gentry, and informal fees. In a crowded yamen, petitioners waited with folded papers. The official behind the desk had imperial authority, but rarely enough money or trustworthy staff. That magistrate is worth keeping in view. He receives a flood report, a theft complaint, a tax dispute, and an order from above in the same day. The granary is short. A relief payment has been delayed. The runner sent to check the village returns with a number that seems too neat. When the center asks for certainty, he sends a document that makes confusion look manageable. A small garrison faces a similar decay. Stipend money arrives late or loses value before it reaches the men. The officer reports that training continues. The arrows are poor, the powder damp, and the armor is kept more for inspection than use. Nothing here is yet rebellion. It is what a strained state looks like before rebellion gives it a name. The White Lotus Uprising was one of the first ruptures to give that strain a name. Around the turn of the 19th century, it spread through mountainous regions where state control was already difficult. Suppression required money, troops, and local coordination that the dynasty struggled to provide cleanly. Reports exaggerated victories. Costs were concealed. Commanders competed for funds. The rebellion was eventually defeated, but the court had learned how expensive victory could become when its own information was unreliable. Along the coast, another pressure was building. The Canton trade had long confined foreign commerce through licensed merchants and official supervision. To Qing officials, this was border management, fitted to an empire that placed outside trade within hierarchy. British merchants, backed by an expanding maritime and industrial power, wanted wider access. Their demands came with ships, credit, diplomatic insistence, and a growing illegal opium trade. Opium made commercial conflict a crisis of state. The trade drew silver out through illegal channels and raised fears about social damage and official corruption. Lin Zexu's suppression campaign at Canton was an attempt to restore control. It also struck directly at British commercial interests. When war came, Qing commanders were not facing a familiar frontier enemy. They faced naval power, industrial production, and a diplomatic world where military defeat became treaty language. The Treaty of Nanjing in 1840 marked a hard change in the dynasty's condition. Hong Kong Island was ceded. Treaty ports opened. Indemnities had to be paid. The Canton system was broken. Later, agreements deepened foreign privileges, including rights that placed foreign subjects partly beyond ordinary Qing legal authority. A Qing official in a treaty port now had to read not only imperial instructions, but foreign demands written in treaty terms. The human stakes were immediate. A merchant in Shanghai could profit from new trade while fearing sudden legal complications. A comprador moved between languages and commercial worlds. A clerk in a customs house watched silver enter accounts that served Qing revenue and foreign expectations. A local magistrate could no longer assume that every dispute in his district belonged wholly to imperial law. Jurisdiction had become part of the treaty system. This did not mean China had become powerless overnight. Taxes still came in. Examinations still drew scholars. Provincial cities still held markets and repaired walls. Yet Qing authority now had fixed exceptions written into port regulations, consular practice, and treaty clauses. A harbour could contain Chinese junks, foreign steamers, imperial customs staff, and consular buildings, each connected to a different chain of power. The empire continued, but with constraints visible at the water's edge. The Maritime Customs Service showed this ambiguity with unusual clarity. It helped collect revenue efficiently, and the Qing state needed that income. Yet foreign involvement in the institution revealed the dynasty's altered position. In a customs office, neat ledgers and reliable collections did not erase the fact that tariff revenue now depended on arrangements shaped under foreign pressure. Late Qing government survived by accepting compromises that earlier emperors would have found difficult to imagine. Then came the Taiping Rebellion. It began in the south amid social dislocation, ethnic tension, religious vision, and anti-Qing feeling. Hong Xiuqun's movement captured Nanjing and built a rival regime there. For more than a decade, central and southern China endured conflict on a scale that drained the dynasty's strength. Historians often estimate the death toll at around 20 million or more. The number is stark. The damage to trust, Fields and families cannot be held inside it. The Qing court could not restore order by relying on its old military institutions. It turned to provincial leaders who raised their own armies. Zheng Guofan's Xiang army was built through personal loyalty, local networks, and regional financing rather than the banner system. Li Hongzhang later built similar power through the Huai army. These forces helped defeat the Taiping. They also changed the balance inside the empire. A soldier in one of these armies often served a commander, a pay chest, and a provincial network before any wider loyalty to the dynasty. That mattered after the fighting ended. Beijing remained the ritual center, and the emperor still issued commands. But real military capacity had shifted. The court had survived its greatest internal crisis by allowing regional power to grow stronger than the system could comfortably absorb. The self-strengthening movement came from officials who understood that survival required change. Arsenals were built. The Jiangnan Arsenal in Shanghai translated foreign technical works and manufactured weapons. The Fuzhou shipyard trained men in naval skills. New schools taught languages and practical knowledge. Telegraph lines and steam navigation entered official use. The guiding idea was cautious. Use foreign techniques while preserving the moral and political foundations of the dynasty. The difficulty lay in the gap between machine and institution. A rifle could be imported faster than a command system could be reformed. A shipyard could launch vessels without creating a modern naval culture. Telegraph wire could carry orders quickly, but speed did not guarantee truth or obedience. Provincial officials controlled many projects because they had the money and urgency to act. The center approved modernization, then struggled to direct it. In daily life, late Qing China became visibly mixed. A student might leave a classical academy for a modern school. A merchant in Shanghai might read a newspaper beside a warehouse of imported cloth. A clerk might copy railway regulations under a portrait of the emperor. In a treaty port office, maps, clocks, ledgers, and interpreters brought several worlds into one room. None of this was simple imitation. It was adaptation under pressure. The defeat by Japan in 1890 cut through that unevenness. Japan had transformed itself with remarkable speed after the Meiji Restoration. Its victory over the Qing revealed failures of command, finance, training, and naval organization. The Treaty of Shimonoseki recognized Korea's independence from Qing suzerainty, ceded Taiwan, the Pescadores, and the Liaodong Peninsula, and imposed a heavy indemnity. Then Russia, France and Germany forced Japan to return Liaodong for an additional payment. Defeat had become entangled with wider imperial pressure. The shock was strategic and emotional. A neighboring Asian state had mastered the new instruments more effectively than the Qing. The Beiyang fleet, built with great effort and public hope, had failed in war. Officials who had argued for gradual strengthening now faced a harsher question. Was machinery enough if the institutions around it remained divided, underfunded, and politically cautious? Reform grew more urgent. The Guangxu Emperor backed the 100 Days of Reform in 1890. 8, with advisors who wanted rapid institutional change. Their proposals reached into education, administration, and state organization. They were bold, but politically exposed. Cixi and conservative forces at court moved against them. The failure was not simply a story of reaction defeating progress. It showed how dangerous rapid reform became when authority, trust, and bureaucratic support were weak. The Boxer crisis soon placed that weakness before foreign armies. Rural anger in North China, Christian hostility, drought, missionary tension, and resentment of foreign privilege fed a violent movement. Court policy wavered, then moved into confrontation. In 1900, foreign forces entered Beijing. The settlement that followed imposed a huge indemnity and allowed foreign troops to guard routes to the capital. The occupation left a memory that no later reform decree could easily soften. After 1900, reform became official policy. The new policies tried to rebuild the state before revolution did it from outside. Modern schools expanded. New armies were trained. Ministries were reorganized. Legal and police reforms were attempted. Provincial assemblies appeared. A constitutional future was promised. In 1905, the civil service examinations were abolished, ending one of the oldest channels between classical learning, family ambition, and imperial office. The abolition was necessary to many reformers, but it had a social cost. For centuries, a scholar could imagine service through study, discipline, and examination success. The system was narrow and unequal, yet it gave the dynasty a language of merit and moral order. When it disappeared, modern schools did not instantly replace its authority. Young men learned new subjects and new politics. Some still sought office. Others began to imagine China without a throne. The new army carried a similar danger. Modern drill, rifles, and officer training were meant to strengthen the dynasty. They also created disciplined men exposed to new ideas and provincial loyalties. Railways were meant to bind the country together. Their financing and ownership provoked anger when local interests felt sacrificed to central policy and foreign loans. In Sichuan, railway nationalization threatened local shareholders and helped spark the railway protection movement. Troops were drawn away from Hubei, leaving Wuchang more vulnerable. The troop diversion did not cause revolution by itself. It opened space in a new army environment already touched by radical societies, rumors, and anger at the court. The promised constitution had created a delayed timetable that satisfied few. Provincial assemblies gave educated men a place to debate budgets, railways, and rights. Once they had learned to speak in public, they were less willing to return to silence. By 1911, the dynasty still stood, but many supports had become conditional. Provincial elites wanted influence. Revolutionaries wanted a republic. Merchants wanted order. Soldiers wanted pay and purpose. Foreign debts pressed on the treasury. The child Emperor Puyi sat above a court that could still issue edicts, but confidence no longer moved reliably from Beijing to the provinces. The Wuchang Uprising began in October among new army circles and revolutionary networks. It was not perfectly planned. Revolutions rarely are. What mattered was the reaction that followed. Province after province declared against Qing rule. Some officials resisted. Others negotiated or changed sides. Yuan Shikai, commander of the Beiyang army, became the indispensable broker because he controlled the strongest military force still capable of shaping the outcome. On the first day of 1912, a republic was proclaimed at Nanjing with Sun Yat, Sen as provisional president. The Qing court still existed in Beijing. For a few weeks, China had two claims to political future. Sun understood that his revolutionary government was militarily weak. Yuan understood that the court needed him, and that the revolutionaries needed his army. The final settlement was political maneuver as much as constitutional principle. On the 12th of February, the Abdication edict was issued in the name of the child emperor. Cixi was dead by then. The court that remained negotiated survival terms for the imperial household, while Yuan Shikai moved towards the presidency and Sun Yat. Sen stepped aside. Imperial monarchy in China ended with a document, not a final palace assault. The old state passed through ink, signatures, pressure, and calculation. The quietness of that ending should not mislead us. The Qing had not fallen because of one lost war or one failed reform. Its collapse came through accumulated burdens: population pressure, limited revenue, aging military institutions, foreign coercion, internal rebellion, provincial militarization, court faction, debt, and reforms that weakened old legitimacy before new authority had settled. Telegraphs and steamships made the crisis move faster. They did not create the crisis by themselves. What had once made the dynasty strong also made its late crisis difficult to solve. Its multi-ethnic empire required different systems of rule across China proper, Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang. Its bureaucracy was economical, but too thin for a transformed age. Its rituals had given order, but could not settle railway finance or treaty law. Its commanders had saved the state during rebellion, then left military power lodged outside the old center. After the abdication, the Forbidden City still held halls built for a monarchy that claimed cosmic authority. Chengde still preserved temples and palaces from a court that had governed through several political languages. Banner quarters, examination compounds, treaty. Port buildings and railway stations remained in the landscape. The new republic inherited Qing frontiers, provincial armies, foreign concessions, indemnity obligations, and a society whose old route to office had been cut away. Students turned to modern schools, overseas study, journalism, military academies, and political organizations. The scholar. Official ideal did not vanish in a day, but it lost its institutional home. Officials who'd served emperors learned new titles. Soldiers kept their commanders. Merchants watched credit, railways, and treaty obligations with practical concern. The Qing was China's last imperial dynasty and the last vast state built around throne, right, examination, and agrarian revenue. It could command grain fleets, rank officials, print calendars, and guard frontiers thousands of miles apart. It could send banners to the steppe and magistrates to the counties. It could fill palaces, temples, archives, and examination halls with the routines of authority. It could not easily master treaty clauses, railway loans, and armies loyal to men below the throne. At treaty ports, steamships and junks belonged to the same country at the moment of transition. The world of river transport, market towns, and imperial accounting had not disappeared. It was still there, in ledgers, docks, and warehouses. But coal smoke, foreign pressure, rifles, loans, and railway timetables now pressed on every delay. Officials trained to restore order through record and rank were facing problems that did not wait for the old procedures. For a long while, those procedures had governed an empire. By 1912, they could not answer the next question. The Abdication Edict ended the dynasty. Yuan Shikai took the presidency. Sun Yat. Sen's republic entered a difficult life almost at once. That's provincial armies remained. Treaty obligations remained. The old throne was gone, but the work of building a modern Chinese state had only begun.